During the Black Lives Matter protests, there was a heated academic debate about the effects of race on the use of police force. A factor complicating the analysis was that one can only be subject to force if one is stopped, and this itself can depend on race. One thing we might want to know here is how much race influences the use of force, not as a result of influencing stops. This is called the direct effect of race. Today we'll see that this concept is surprisingly difficult to make precise. To see why, consider two worlds. In one, we intervene to make police not stop any individual. If no individual is stopped, then no force can be used. So race has no direct effect on force. In the other world, we intervene to make the police stop every individual. We could then measure how much race influences force in this world. Here race might exert a sizable direct effect. Both of these interventions isolate the direct effect, but we get two different results. So which, if either, is correct? Today I'll explain how to answer such questions in a principled way. Hello, and welcome to Causal Foundations. I'm Naftali Weinberger, a philosopher of science who's been researching causal models for over a decade. In this series, I introduce foundational concepts from causal inference in videos of approximately 10 minutes. I'll begin by introducing some basic terminology. In this model, we refer to the cause as the treatment, the effect as the outcome, and the intermediate variable as the mediator. A causal path is a set of arrows all going in the same direction. The indirect path is that going by the mediator, while the direct path captures the influence of the treatment on the outcome via factors not going through the mediator. The effect of the treatment on the outcome via all paths is called the total effect. Causal mediation aims to identify the effect going via specific paths, where the influence via the direct path is called the direct effect, and the influence via the indirect path is the indirect effect. Now suppose I were to ask you to divide up this causal model into two independent mechanisms. You might be inclined to decompose the model into the independent contributions of the direct and indirect paths. But this is not possible. Whether race has any effect on force depends on whether one is stopped. So what happens along the direct path depends on the value of the mediator. The independent mechanisms in this model are not the two paths, but rather the two structural equations. One gives the mediator as a function of the treatment. The other gives the outcome as a function of the treatment and mediator. It is these equations, not the paths, that operate independently. The structural equations contain probabilistic error terms, reflecting causal heterogeneity within a population. But we can also use something called a potential outcome to describe the effects in individuals, which are assumed to be deterministic. For instance, m sub x equals 0 indicates the value that the mediator would take on if x were set to 0 via an intervention. Y sub x and m indicates the value of the outcome when jointly intervening to give x and m their relevant values. Both of these are indexed to an individual, I, though typically we only ever identify average effects, which are derived by taking the expectation. The most influential paper on mediation is Barron and Kenny, 1986. Their method is limited to linear models with no interaction. No interaction means that the contribution of each cause to an effect does not depend on the values of the others. In linear models, we can assign each arrow its own parameter, and mediation is simple. The direct effect corresponds to alpha, and the indirect effect is beta times gamma. The total effect is then the sum of the direct and indirect effects. If you take away just one lesson from this episode, it's that you shouldn't train your intuitions of how mediation works based on the linear case. The police example is not adequately represented by a linear model, since there's no such alpha that gives the direct effect across all values of m. So what does the direct effect even refer to in this case? To figure out what happens along the direct path, a sensible proposal is to intervene on the mediator, which breaks the arrows going into it so that it no longer depends on its direct causes. Doing so yields the controlled direct effect. Let's fill in the details. Let x be 0 if the person is black, and 1 if they're white, and let m be 0 if the person is not stopped, and 1 if they are. The control direct effect for m equals 0 is the difference in the value of y when changing x from 0 to 1, while holding m fixed at 0. For populations, this means not stopping anyone in the population. We can similarly define the control direct effect for setting m to 1 and stopping everyone. While the CDE for m equals 0 here is 0, for m equals 1 it could be sizable. How might we choose between these two effects? To build some intuitions, consider someone who would never have been stopped, no matter her race. Forcing the police not to stop her wouldn't change a thing, so the no-stop control direct effect is relevant. But for someone who would have always been stopped, the control direct effect for m equals 1 is relevant. So a different mediator value is relevant for each individual. The problem is that the control direct effect requires us to set the mediator to the same value for every individual. But there's an even deeper problem with the control direct effect. Because the intervention on m breaks the arrow going into it, it transforms the case into one with no indirect path. But what we want to know is the contribution of the direct path when the treatment does influence the mediator. To learn this, we'll need a different type of intervention. To set things up, consider a black individual, so x equals 0. The potential outcome m sub x equals 0 denotes the value the mediator would take on given that this individual is black. Similarly, the outcome takes in the value it does when the person is black and stopped as if she were black. Now let's intervene on the treatment to make the individual be perceived as white. Usually this would also determine the values of the mediator and outcome. But suppose that in addition to changing race from black to white, we intervened on the mediator to keep it at its x equals 0 value, and seeing which outcome results. This is a subtle intervention. By setting the mediator as a function of x equals 0, we make it behave as if it were still an effect of the treatment. But because it's held at this value, it doesn't respond to the change of x from 0 to 1. This type of intervention allows us to define the natural direct effect, which concerns the effect of a particular change in the treatment, if that change were to be transmitted only via the direct path. Consider the change from black to white. Starting with the values for a black individual, what is the difference in the use of force when we change race from black to white, while stopping the person as if they were black? This is the NDE of going from 0 to 1. Now consider the change from white to black. Starting with a white individual, the natural direct effect is the change in force resulting from changing race from white to black, while stopping the person as if they were white. Both NDEs refer to the effect on the outcome of changing the treatment from one value to another while holding the mediator fixed at its non-change value. Since they're evaluated relative to different values of the mediator, they're distinct causal quantities. Unlike the controlled direct effect, which sets the mediator to the same value for every individual, the natural direct effect sets each individual's mediator to the specific value it would take on for them, given the non-change value of the treatment. The notation for natural direct effects can be daunting, but what really matters is understanding why one might care about such a thing. Take a second to ponder the deep philosophical question of how you can know if your fridge light turns off when you shut the door. After all, you can't see inside when the door is closed. So what you need to do is find the button that's pressed when the door is closed, and to press it yourself. The reason this works is that you don't set the button to some arbitrary state, but to the state it would take on if the door were closed. This is analogous to what we're trying to figure out with the natural direct effect. We're not asking whether changing race would make a difference in force if we arbitrarily decided whether to stop or not stop someone. We're asking if it would make a difference if we stopped them as we would have had we not changed their race. That's it for today's episode. To summarize, we saw that outside of linear models, what happens along the direct path depends on the value of the mediator. So the contributions of the direct and indirect paths cannot be fully disentangled. Nevertheless, there is a question we can ask about the contribution of the direct path. Namely, relative to a change in the treatment, what would happen to the outcome if that change were to be transmitted only via the direct path. This is called the natural direct effect, and defining it was one of the major achievements of modern causal methodology. Thank you for listening. Come back next episode for indirect effects. And if you made it this far, please don't forget to like and subscribe.